Welcome to Security Panel. We're here to discuss security behavioral change. And on this panel, we have a collection of security professionals from around the world. And what we're going to talk about today is security as a practice, but also as a behavioral change for the people in the workforce that we work with. So security is somewhat subjective. We have policies, we have procedures, but really those are not worth much on the paper if the people don't follow them. The more complicated your programs are, people will find ways to avoid or bypass that security. So the challenge that we have as security professionals is how do we get people to get a more security-centric mindset? How do we develop proper programs, proper changes, and help encourage security mindset, because the security teams can't do it alone. They need the participation from all the employees, from the vendors, and from everybody with them. So today we have a panel of 4 individuals. I'll start. I am Drew Koenig. I'm the host of this panel. I am based out of Minnesota in the United States. I've been doing information security and IT for almost 20 years now. Started off as a programmer and evolved my way up into the information security space. Currently a security consultant, left the corporate world, moved back into consulting to help as many clients and enjoy the dynamic nature of security problems from across the spectrum. On the side, I run a blog, binaryblogger.com, and I also do a daily security podcast called Security in 5, where I just talk about security tips and tricks, trying to help the world become a more secure place. Next on the panel is Chad Cleese. Chad?
Hey, good morning. Thanks, Drew. My name is Chad Cleese. I'm here in Evanston, just a suburb just north of Chicago. I came into all of this in somewhat of a, what you might call a meandering way. I'm self-taught. I chose to work once I graduated high school and started as a carpenter about 30 years ago. And that led to journalism. Journalism led to teaching. I was an educator and designing and building web-based curriculum for high-functioning autistic students at a small private just east of Seattle, a small school funded by one back in the 90s. And that's what led me to technology and in Alaska, actually, and supporting private sector commercial fishing industries with a lot of open source tools to cure and increase their performance. And Alaska is an interesting place to start your career as an engineer because there's a lot of kooks in Alaska, as you might imagine. The ladies in Alaska have a phrase that the odds are good, but the goods are odd. And I would say that's probably pretty apt description and the experience of engineering, especially marine-based systems and remote systems in the far-flung corners of the state. There's a lot of very intelligent, kooky people in the state, and they tinker with everything, not in a malicious way, but in ways that can often, cause outages and things like that. So all the things that I was building there had to have a high degree of availability and security. And so for that 5 or 6 years that I lived there, that was the norm. And in 2000 through 2006, when I came back to the lower 48 and worked for Omnicom, building web architecture, as we're all in love, all of those elements of designing systems, security wasn't as much top of mind as it is now, but it was a part of everything that I did. And of course, within security, you may argue that working with people and spreading awareness is the biggest challenge of all. The machines, the technical part of that is, as you said, you have policies and procedures and controls and all the governance and compliance in the world. But without buy-in, without a thoughtful, intentional group of people behind those, there's a lot of effort wasted, and it's hard to get to where we want to be. So now I work in the consulting space like you. I work with companies of all shapes and sizes, from regulated industries, healthcare, financial services, transportation, to marketing and advertising, education, my IoT for retail, manufacturing, and health sciences, and some AR companies as well to help them prepare to be resilient against attacks. And awareness is certainly one of our most important tools. I'm happy to be here today. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next on our panel is Amanda Price. Amanda?
Hi. That was just fascinating, Kat. I just love listening to how you derive in security, and it's interesting, isn't it? That so far all three of us haven't started out in security. We found ourselves there. That's because it's absolutely fascinating, changing the world that we live in. And so, yes, of course, how can we not be involved? I started out in theatre, and then I went into teaching, but always retained a link to the theatre. And then became fascinated by what I saw as a massive shift in culture. And of course, if you work in theatre, you're interested in culture. And I had the opportunity, alongside three other colleagues, to start a company called Layer 8, where we looked at how we could develop positive security culture in corporate space. And it was very idealistic aims that we had. We saw an opportunity there for people to embrace security and to embrace a kind of community of security within the corporate space, and really to close that gap between policy and practice. And so I spend a lot of my time now with my colleagues devising workshops, creating effective comms. Our desire is to engage people in the security space, get people talking about it's absolutely fascinating, and it's changing how we see the world every day. We're just going into the mobile space. That's really, really exciting. But what we all say every day is we haven't met an employee yet who isn't security. It's maybe that they just have. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to have a conversation with everybody to get them involved. And to get them spending them very positive, proactive. And I'm delighted to be here today.
All right, thank you. And our last panel member is Eden Bieber. Eden?
Hi there. So, my name is Eden. I live here in London, in the United Kingdom, and I've been involved in information security from quite a young age, before the days of the internet even, and it's been an interesting journey. I have been extremely fascinated with awareness, at the beginning mainly on looking at the adversary, from the adversary point, but I think my main interest has evolve as time progressed to the organizations themselves, and a lot have to do with the fact that I have three kids, and my youngest son, who's 16 and a half, when he was 3.5 years old, he was diagnosed with severe autism. Now, autism by nature is a disorder that practically prevents a child who has that disorder from being able to communicate with you, and the impact of the inability to socialize, to connect and to learn had quite a profound shift in my view on how awareness should be. I still remember the times that awareness was viewed as a compliance activity, and so the last year or so, up until a year ago, I worked in a big corporation here. About a year ago, I took some time off. I became more. I'm still a consultant, and I have been looking quite a lot into trying to find a way to describe awareness from the scientific point of view, especially because I always felt that there is that attempts to change the state of awareness with regards to information security was not very successful in organizations that I've been to. So I think that is my background. I have been after this conversation, I'm going to give a little bit longer talk about the subject and my research and whatever I found in last year, and I'm looking forward for this conversation. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Well, thank you all for attending the panel, and we have a wide spectrum of security experience with more years than we can count. So thank you for all being here, and let's dive right in. So we're here to talk about behavior changes, security behavior changes, and how does that make companies, individuals, the world a more secure place. And we do that through, as Eden said, through awareness, through changing the way we approach security in order to change a mindset, to modify behavior. So the challenge within all the companies is that you have to get a stronger mindset from all the employees, because security is a responsibility for everybody, not just the security department. Because it takes one bad link, one bad email, one bad click to ruin your day. So one place to start to help mold that would be with user experiences. So what do you think it would look like to use the user experiences to help strengthen that security mindset? So we'll start with Amanda. Amanda, what do you think? What do you think would be a good way to approach user experiences?
Well, in my experience, user experiences are a holistic because for a lot of the users that we talk to, security is something that exists in a policy. It's something they've been trying to avoid for quite a long time. They see it as it's a barrier. It's something that stops them doing their job efficiently. And it really has nothing to do with them. It's all to do with some department somewhere that has got to do something. They're not quite sure why. And they don't tend to think initially that it's anything to do with them. So experiences from users are really powerful, especially if employees are given the opportunity to talk about their experience firsthand. And for us at Layer 8, genuine user experience is quite solid. Partly because we're able to use them to build scenarios for training or to write articles, but also because they give us real insight into how people view security, how they manage it, both at home and at work. And so I had an experience just recently where I was working with a group, and the security professionals of a particular company were tearing their hair out because they were saying, people they just keep using the same password for everything. We've told them, they know, they just haven't understand, they don't get it, they won't do it. And there were all kinds of assumptions and stuff about whether, assumptions about, why people were doing this. And then, I'm sorry, I've just seen the sign saying my camera is on. Is everybody able to see me doing this?
You're sending video. It's a little blurry. I don't see it clearly.
All right. Okay. I thought I'd got it turned off. Sorry. Let me go back. Yeah.
Right.
So people just weren't. So there was this sense of nobody knew why people were using the same password for every single app that they were using. And then somebody piped up and said, "I have a password manager, so I don't have a problem with using different passwords. The problem is every time I get asked for a new password, I can't think one up, and my brain just freezes, and I'm not able to think up what kind of password I would use." Other people suddenly livened up in this group and went, "Yeah, that's the situation for me too. I just freeze. I can't think." And then because I've got to get on with this and do it quickly, I just put in the same password. So somebody else then said in the same group, "Oh, we did a password generator," and everybody got really excited about this. So then this person who was explaining about password generator then got out his device and was showing everybody how to do it. And suddenly that group had turned from being a group of people who thought security was really nothing to do with them into a learning group. They were learning from each other. And the problem that we started out with wasn't the problem that actually was the one that we were dealing with. And once we got to the stories and people were telling us about how they managed security, then we realized what the context was. And at that point, we could do something about it. And people love things that work. but that means knowing what the problem is that you're dealing with. And so I think being able to get a group of employees together, talk about their experiences and help each other out is incredibly valuable.
All right, thank you. Chad, do you have any thing to add to this?
I think it's important the way that you mentioned getting people together and letting them share their stories in an effort to help each other. That's what I've seen be the most successful. Listen to Aiden talk about his son and how that is a great analogy for a lot of these things. And you know, analogies are very powerful to make complex things more accessible, friendlier. And you know, when I'm in at the dinner table with, you know, we have 4 kids here. My youngest is 6, and when we talk about safe computing and we talk about these kinds of things, what we hear back from these kids is incredibly unassuming and open and honest about how they feel about this stuff. They're scared or whatever. That's hard to replicate around grown-ups. And so when I enter conference rooms at companies of all shapes and sizes, I muster that same energy that I get from at the dinner table around these kids to transmit analogies that are friendly, that have value for the company that I'm in. There's no one way that's necessarily repeatable. There are frameworks and things and you know, pillars of knowledge that we can repeat, but how we deliver those, how we transmit that, you know, what worked yesterday isn't necessarily going to work today. What worked with one group may not work with another group. And what is repeatable are like true crime stories, right? Sharing these real stories that are interesting. First of all, they have a hook. They can help displace some of the fear and uncertainty and doubt that we've kind of built up around cyber over the years. When you walk into a conference room and you say the word cyber, you know, it tends to suck all the air out of it. And so anything that I can do to displace that fear and uncertainty and doubt and empower people by letting them share their own stories, personal stories that have impacted them and their friends and family on a personal level, really works best and can open the conversation to other, you know, more complex components of that you know, we continue to work through together in friendly ways. I think that's an important point, Amanda.
Great insights. Thank you for that. And that's really what we need to start is that experience, that communication, that transparency to begin, you know, conversations, and ultimately to bring context to why we're all doing this, because we want it to be accepted and adopted, not rejected or looked at as a thing. It's part of our lives now. So how do we do that? Let's move on to the next topic, and that's really about security awareness. And security awareness, it's a wide spectrum. So you can either have companies that have the annual question and answers that they have to take. People click through it. Very, very basic, to more involved, more robust security awareness training. And when you look at the regulations, industries-based security awareness training usually is the first step and is the best practice, and in most cases required as part of any security program. If you go through any type of RFPs or security audits or reviews from vendors, somewhere in those questions is going to be, do you have a security awareness program? And there's a reason for that, because the security teams, they're experts, they're professionals, they're the ones that write the awareness, they're the ones that handle everything out, but the security teams are generally not going to be your primary area of concern. It's going to be the other 99% of the employees out there, and are they aware of the threats and the risks and the dangers of assuming something is safe and turning out to be not, and then you have ransomware go throughout your environment and ruin your day. So one of the things that I tend to do is I change the way I do training programs. Yes, we do have the security awareness, 50 questions, go through it in 45 minutes, a few videos to brush people up to not write their passwords on their whiteboards or leave keys sitting on their desk, clean desk policies, things like that. but also that's generally a one-time deal, and over time, people don't retain it, people don't remember it, people blast through it and don't really learn from it. So what we're going to talk about now is how do we change the awareness and education, it goes into the communication pieces as well, too, to help mold actual behavior. And one thing that I do and have done from the departments that I have ran in the past to the my current employer and what we do today as an ongoing education piece is that, yes, we have the security awareness program, but instead of focusing so much on the question and answers, the multiple choice questions or the drop downs, we shift it into more experience-based, scenario-based. And I'm a big proponent, and even though I don't have it in my company, I fully support and agree with a lot of the papers and scientific studies to show that gamifying or gaming-based education systems are actually more effective when it comes to individuals' retention than just a question and answer. And I don't know if you're aware of some of the security awareness platforms out there that are beginning to shift to more of a game. Some companies have built like kiosks, security awareness kiosks of hundreds upon hundreds, if not thousands of questions, and people can take 10 minutes and go through and try to get a high score, and they're very, very difficult questions, and you kind of gamify it that way. But the other thing that I do from a scenario-based is I actively try to socially engineer, phish, and hack my teammates, coworkers, and other employees. And through that, turn it into an education experience. And in fact, just a few weeks ago, we kicked off our first phishing campaign at my company. 600 employees, a full 100% IT-centric company, developers, and extremely smart infrastructure people. And we do consulting and do application and system development, digital transformations for companies across the country. So very technical, but yet when you send out a very complex phishing email, people get busy, you get hundreds of emails flying in, even though there are red flags in there. We do that on a regular basis to not get them. It's not a get you, it's not a I caught you, oh now you're in trouble type of thing, but it's a educational awareness piece that say if this were a real phishing, you would have inadvertently given your username and password to a hacker. You would have downloaded a package which contained ransomware. You would have brought malware into the environment that installed a keylogger, and those things like that. So I turned it around, and from that experience, especially from a technical mindset, they're not being reprimanded anyway. We might put them through another 15-minute re-education video, depending on the severity of the phish. If they actually downloaded something, double-clicked it, installed it, we can track all those types of things. But then again, in the future, it's, well, now I'm going to be real hesitant. And what I say at what I've told all my team members, what I've told my clients, what I've told my other employees and coworkers that I've worked with, it's better to hesitate and ask than click and be wrong. And it's to build that hesitation in there and to reaffirm to everybody that the internet is not to be trusted. Not everything, just because it comes through email, doesn't mean it's actually coming from this vendor. No, your bank didn't lock out your account if you don't log in this second, and those types of things. So Amanda, what do you? I know you've got security awareness very strongly in your background, obviously. So what do you think about security awareness versus scenario-based versus just the question and answers? What are your thoughts?
Well, your examples are great for it. I think using scenarios is a brilliant way to break down that kind of science mindset amongst employees. Because really, once you get the PowerPoint up there, once you're just doing tick boxes, what you're testing is retention. You're not testing understanding, you're not testing engagement, and that's the problem. So one of the rules we set for ourselves is no PowerPoint, no bullet points, and it's a hard one because we all like to fall back on that because it persuades us that we're actually doing something, having a PowerPoint up there or whatever. But very often nothing is happening from days. So we work very hard to find new ways of engaging people, and just make them realise that security is about them. interestingly, I mean, I was fascinated when you were talking about social engineering your colleagues and the phishing test, because I think those really have a place in security awareness, and I think they're a really useful tool. But we tend to get called in by companies who've done social engineering tests, and hired somebody to come in and get into the building, get access to a desk maybe or a computer or whatever. And in one case, we had somebody who sat there for 3 days and nobody had actually confronted them or asked them what they were doing there. And what's really interesting is that we tend to deal with groups of people who've gone through this kind of exercise and come out the other end. And in some cases, people are still saying, yeah, but it was okay, wasn't it? It was okay. I don't know what they could have got hold of. And it's at that point, it's in that kind of debrief of those exercises, you really start to find out, what sort of things are doing and how far they're thinking. But very often, it's about the fact that they haven't really been drawn into a conversation about this, things that they haven't really thought very deeply about. So actually, just take that question, well, yes, somebody came and sat down for 3 days, worked, and I noticed him, and okay, he was there and nobody else was there. And then you ask, well, yeah, but what do you think was the problem? And once you start to push a little and get people to really think about the perspective of the situation, then actually the answers are all there. People don't know it, but they thought about it. So a lot of the work that we do is about shifting from tests that require retention to activities that allow people to get fully involved and to experience something and allow them to think about security in a way that links their own lives. So there's one thing that we do where we set up a tailgating scenario, and we actually act this out. And so we have a guy who's leaving to go home. He's got a bit of a drama going on at home, so he's trying to get away. And somebody approaches him and sort of says, oh, I'm a colleague, I'm down for 3 days from leave. Could you let me in? Backwards and forwards going on. And he's obviously being social engineered, but what's unclear from the scenario, which is acted out in front of him, is whether the social engineer is actually a colleague or not. They're certainly using social engineering techniques, but their story is to some degree plausible. So at the end of this scenario that we act out, we say to everybody, right, what was going on? And we say, right, you've now got the opportunity to direct that to get a better outcome. So people can only direct the guy because social engineering is kind of off limit, but they can give the guy instructions on how to sort of handle the situation better, stop the colleague being able to get into the building. And what's interesting is watching people having to work out what the techniques are. People always start out by saying, oh, just tell her to do one. And tell her, you're not going to let her in. And of course, that doesn't work because she could be a colleague. And, we sort of tease that out. And it's a really fascinating exercise because everybody gets involved. Everybody's got a viewpoint on this. It's human. You've got this guy who, it's somebody in role, but he's keeping the role, he's playing the role, and he's saying, yeah, but I don't know, I don't want to be impolite, but I know I'm not supposed to let the person in. What am I supposed to say? And it's a really fascinating way to get everybody engaged and focused on security in the room. Also, it's something you're going to go away and talk about, because in the process, you're laughing, there's banter going on, but people are really engaged in the issue. So I think scenarios are a great way of dealing with it, because it makes the human rather than.
You're dead on right. And just as a very overly simplistic example that I throw out there is that as people, everybody listening to this, everybody on this panel, we all know not to hold our hand over a lit candle. And why is that? Because at some point in our life, even though our parents said, don't hold your hand over the flame, don't hand your, at some point we did it. And even though we were told multiple times, it wasn't until we did it that we absolutely learned that, yeah, we shouldn't do that. Overly simplistic, but it brings context to it. Another example of contextual learning is that I was at a client last month doing an enterprise security risk assessment and vulnerability scanning and the whole spiel, and I discovered that some of their systems had a very old exposed vulnerability on it, and they were like, yeah, we're aware of it. Yeah, it's whatever. It's gonna be sunset in a couple of years. We're just kind of living with it. Blah blah blah. But that wasn't good enough because this was a Sev 10 vulnerability, and they claimed that it wasn't enough data on there. But so what I did was proceeded to. It took me about 2 minutes to do. I typed in the vulnerability in YouTube. I found a video that was 4 minutes long, and 2 minutes of that was the entire process from start to finish of how somebody could exploit this vulnerability. And that really brought context that, yeah, you cannot ignore these security gaps because here's how easy it is. And I think one of the things, and you had mentioned that, so what? What if they get in and let them come in? There's really nothing here. That the security exploits are really far easier than what people think. Yes, there are some hacking attempts that take extreme amount of computational power, et cetera, but hackers are businesses now. Cyber criminals are businesses. They are going to do things just like anybody else, the most effective way possible. And when you go out and search, and last year I went through the full pen test, ethical hacking, Metasploit, spent several months going through all that training. And what I walked away from, aside from a whole new set of tools for white hat activities, I realized how really simple a lot of this hacking is, and it doesn't take a lot of energy to do it. And so when you have these types of phishing, it's just a phishing email, big deal, but it doesn't take much for data to fly out the door. So thank you for that insight. So now let's move on to our next topic. And so we have policies and procedures. I mentioned at the beginning of this panel that every company has an information security policy document, or should have. They have policies written down. They've got procedures. They've got steps and all these guidelines and so on and so forth. But really, those are written on paper, and generally people before look at that as confined to the rules of the corporate world, and then outside, back to the personal lives, they don't really apply. But the world has now changed. The world, the cloud, the quote-unquote service-oriented world where the firewall borders, the hard perimeters around a company are beginning to fade away and blur. There really is no differentiation anymore between corporate systems, SaaS or cloud-based systems, to personal devices and all of this. So now it's all blurring together. So how do you think tying policies and practices and bringing them down to the individual's private lives might help change security behaviors? Eden, I'll throw it over to you. What do you think about that, bringing policies to the individual level?
So, first of all, I would like to use a definition. So we're talking about practically culture and organization culture. The policies that we have in an organization are part of its culture. And Ed Schein, who's one of the most known researchers in organizational culture, defined the culture of a group as the accumulated shared learning of that group as its solve of external adaptation, problems of external adaptation and internal integration, which have worked well enough to be considered valid and therefore may be taught to new members as the correct way to perceive, think, feel, and behave in relation to those problems. Now, we all, and this goes back to the personal experience that we all have. Unless you are able to tie the organization policies to the individual perception of reality, which we can define it as different layers of frames of references. unless you do that, there is no match. Each and every one of us have its own personal goals. Each and every one of us have its own perception of reality, and that meaning is everything to us. We don't really see a world full of objects out there. We see it as something which is meaningful to us. And if you want to try to integrate the two, integrate the internal, let's say it like this: if you want to integrate the corporate policies, which practically says what you should and shouldn't do, with the individual perception of what he should or shouldn't do, you need to really tie it to in various levels. There's obviously and again, if you go to HR and he describes the organization as three levels, as three layers. There's the obvious artifacts that we see outside. There's the middle layer with all the definitions of, for example, policies, and the cultural DNA, which is in the lower one. We are as individuals, as human beings, we have the biological layer, which when we talk about risk, there would be physical risk that we can associate with that. We have I would call it the cultural level, probably, that is above it. There's the social level, which is how do we socialize, how would organize things, and there's the cultural level, which are very much connected. If you want to have an individual and tie the corporate policies to that individual, you should really try to figure out a way on how would you tie all those layers, the personal elements, the physical elements, and cultural, physical, and the social levels. All of them should be tied together. If you don't, then what happens, because of the nature? Jordan Peterson, who's a clinical psychologist who used to work in Harvard, and now he's teaching in Toronto, and for some reason he became very famous in the last year because he was very active in freedom of speech and pronouns. He described that whenever we do something, we sort of like zoom into that task. We don't really see anything else. So when you are focusing on something, even elements that relates to information security would sort of like fade away. And the challenge is to try to make sure that even when somebody is focusing on something which seemingly not important, to tie it to when he's at work, to tie those elements of the elements in the corporate governance, so they would be sticking with him throughout whatever frame of reference he looks at the world at that point of time.
All right, thank you for the insights on this, bringing corporate policy down to tying them to the individual practice.
Drew, I think Eden made a really important point about focus, that most of us are focused on our personal lives more often than our professional lives. We're at work sometimes that things that maybe someone in our bill or something that we need to do, and then we have, the time we're not at work, we're focused on our family and our friends and our things, and that we have to do there. And so you might say that in the hierarchy of value and our focus, those things are slightly higher. Which is to say, we're in this lives, but when we're talking about these focus in the context of building awareness, I have not seen these programs be very successful in giving people tools and tactics and strategies to use at work and expect them to take them home. I've only seen, I would take this a step further and say, of course, we need to connect these people with, real people and real their personal lives. But I would take it a step further. That these tools and methods that we give to people have to have value for them in their personal lives first. Only then, right, will we bring them to to work and let them inform the kinds of decisions that we make outside of our homes and our personal lives. So if we're going to make, it helps if you put them in the water. And our water is the tools and the things that we do in our personal life, how technology in our personal lives. So the incentive, back to your statement, which I think is really important about, gamification, and, gamification works really well in a lot of contexts to a certain degree, right? Education and, you might even say politics, right? But we have this mechanism for building incentive. How do we do that? Well, we incentivize people by giving them valuable ways to protect themselves and their family and their friends. That then informs the way they behave at work.
Yeah, and I guess one final thought that I had is one little practice that I did with the security department is that every payday we would release a newsletter, or the company would release a newsletter that had a bunch of stuff. And I had a security corner at the bottom of that. And I would do two things. One, I would be fully transparent to say, here's the corporate security initiative for the week. This is why we're doing it. But then I would also give them a personal tip. For example, we have a password policy that is, this many characters, this long, and so on and so forth. This is why you should have it on your email account as well, et cetera, et cetera. Little things like that, but make a big difference. And when I think it's the transparency piece, and you explain the why. Why are we doing? Why do we have these policies in place? And then tie it and says, well, you should probably do this too. I think at the end of the day, I think the three of us are in a line that it's all about that understanding, and it's bringing that back full circle, because one remote BYOD device or a cloud service can trickle down anywhere and everywhere now, and we're showing that breaches are happening all the time. We're seeing that, and that's what we have to fight against. So as we wrap up the panel, we're going to move on. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Very true.
Yes.
Just say how important I think that is. I love your security tip. I think that's a really great idea, and also that website, because that's how we do things. It's not just to get a piece of paper, digital, but you go, oh, I don't know much of this, and somebody else says, well, I tell you, and that transaction is really important to our industry. And so just take it closely and work with it. Moves you immensely in the back of it.
All right, thank you for that. Yeah, and it's just an amazing time right now, and with the expansion of the services going above and beyond, and really no walls any longer, it all needs to come full circle. All right, so wrapping up the panel, we're going to move on to our last topic, and this one we talked through awareness, phishing campaigns, social engineering. We talked about policies and procedures and all of this, and so we talk about that behavior. And very lightheartedly, but I want to talk about the other side, the flip side of all of these policies. What do we do when we have a security violation, either direct or indirect, a mistake or deliberate, in and around the employees and coworkers and various other entities that are in and around our environments? So we have a security violation. How do we handle that in order to help improve and correct behavior, but also in such a way that we don't defeat lower the morale of the other employees on those types of mistakes, and turn the security department into looking like a police force or a black box or the bad guys. So it's really the education versus discipline versus using it as a positive experience versus a negative experience. So Chad, what do you think about that? We have security violations, and it's going to vary depending on the severity of it. So what do you think? How do we handle the security violations to help continue to improve the behavior around security mindsets?
Well, it's really important that in the way we respond to incidents isn't working, in direct opposition to all the confidence and awareness we're trying to foster in our teams. It's easy to do that, right? It's really easy when something happens across the org chart. It's easy for leaders to respond, and somewhat aggressive, ways, as well as infosec teams or IT, and all of you. I've seen the full spectrum, right? And it doesn't really matter if it's a huge enterprise or a small boutique, agency of some kind. I've seen the full range of responses to that. And the only thing that I've seen personally be successful in lots of different kinds of cultures is to incentivize these kinds of things. For example, when someone discovers a phishing, whether it's a phishing email, whether it's a test, right, or it's the real McCoy, reporting those things and being rewarded for that, right? With incentives, it kind of goes back to your gamification thing, that by empowering people to report these and feel empowered to do that. And it can be a small thing. I've seen companies use gift cards to get coffee or iTunes or, small little, just, hey, that's awesome. Thank you for protecting our bottom line. Thank you for protecting our information. When things happen, when incidents happen, I participate in a lot of DFIR, digital forensics and incident response activities, and the phone usually rings when something happens, unfortunately, and in those situations, I see that also as an opportunity for inclusion, include who was the point of, in this case, in this context, maybe the vector by which that attack, originated, and how someone gained entry, include them in that process and educate them, use it as an opportunity, pushing those people back into the shadows and creating fear and uncertainty around those things can undo the work that we have done over months and years to build confidence and awareness in our teams in minutes. It can literally wipe it out. And so what does that mean to the bottom line? It means that we wasted time and money and resources. And so, I don't think it can be overstated enough that when we're in the midst of, handling security violations, whether it's, someone reporting a phishing attempt or reporting that they clicked on something and nothing happened, but something happened, and, being honest and keep people talking. Anything we can do to keep people talking and keep those channels open is far better than putting all of the efforts that we've made up to that point at risk.
All right, thank you. Eden, do you have any insights into this?
Yes, I totally support Chad in that. I think if you would have asked me what would be the optimal culture or one of the most important elements of a corporation culture that can help it to handle this chaotic threat landscape that they are facing, is probably the fact that people shouldn't be punished for telling the truth. A lot of times I've seen that people have been punished just because they say something, and people are very much afraid to admit many times that maybe something wrong is happening. There is a natural tendency of us as human beings to try to avoid something bad. It's a natural reaction that we have. If an organization perception is that they need to punish an individual just because he did something wrong, they don't really understand the mechanisms of learning. It doesn't really work like that. It does work when somebody, I don't say if somebody did something intentional, that he shouldn't be facing the responsibility for that. I do think that if we do something intentional, that should be there. But in many times, the most important element is that you need to have a culture of trust in which somebody would be able to say, look, I think something is wrong here. I think I made a mistake, and this is the best assurance that the organization, in my opinion, the best assurance the organization have to handle what we call violation rather than punish. Because if you would punish, and that would be part of and everybody would realize that this is part of the culture, everybody would try to hide away, and it doesn't really work like that. Security is really based on the sharing of honesty between the members of the team, to be able to share what we perceive as real and not, and talk about it and try to figure out maybe we made a mistake, maybe not. But I do think, as Chad was saying, that this is crucial, not to punish, but to incentivize and make the organization more tuned into that.
All right, well, thank you for that. As we wrap up the panel here, I'm going to throw it out to the panelists here. Does anybody have any lasting thoughts, final departing words on this topic around security behavior changes?
Sure. I think, a lot of the conversations that we all hear in the media, outside media, at dinner with friends, wherever it might be, a lot of these conversations revolve around tools. They revolve around products, technologies, hardware, software, and I think it's important to, my colleagues and friends are probably sick of hearing me say it, but it really comes down to people. It comes down to being thoughtful and intentional about the ways we use technologies and the technologies that we choose in our life. And regardless of the hardware, the software that we allow into our lives, that's a choice. And the level of complexity is different for each of us. But one thing should remain the same, is the way that we use those things does impact ourselves and others. And it's important to keep that in mind, that this is about real people and real information about other people and lives and livelihoods. And so this using technology with intention and being thoughtful about the way that we use them is really the best solution to any of these problems. That's what I got. Thanks for listening.
Well, I would just add to that. But I would just add to that. The minute that you start talking about
Sorry to interrupt, Amanda. Can you pump up your volume or speak up a little bit? You're
sorry.
got a little audio problem. Go ahead.
Okay.
There we go.
Is that better?
Yes, much better. Thank you.
Right. So we have a saying which is conversations change culture. And the minute you start talking about security, the culture starts to change. And we've seen that happen. We've seen it happen in big organizations. We've seen it happen in tiny ones. But the minute that people see there's a conversation to be had here and that they can be a part of it, their attitude towards security changes. And that's a really magical moment to witness. And it's available to all of us all the time.
Eden, do you have any lasting thoughts on this topic?
Yes, I would like to add one point. I think there is. I've recently written an article about it in PeerList about the fact that we are, as a profession, or the awareness part of information security, many times is lacking the scientific approach into trying to understand how we can target things. Now, I do understand that human beings are the most complex things in the world, and it is very natural why it is very hard for us to think, or why it's hard for us to think that we can have a change. But there are some elements which can provide us some insights, and I think the fact that we don't yet have a scientific-driven, or at least to my knowledge, there's not yet a scientific-driven model for awareness training. That keeps us in a point of slight disadvantage. I do think that there is. I've been looking at some research. There have been research that was published last year, which was quite interesting, mainly focusing on personality types. And the last point that I would like to say is that if we talk about awareness, almost all researchers would tell you that the most important person when it comes to awareness is the CEO. The CEO is he's the owner of the culture in the organization, practically, not only metaphorically. You cannot, as a CEO, and Ed Schein was saying it a lot, as a CEO, you notice very fast that you are that you cannot really see everything. You don't really understand everything that is happening in the organization. And the culture is the most profound way to shift the direction. And I think that's why I think that any activity of awareness should start with the CEO and make him understand and own that, and then propagate it down to the organization. And that's my take.
Yeah, absolutely right. And my final thoughts are going to be on the security program and teams. And you've all taken some of the winds out of my sails of what I was going to say either way, but common minds think together. But ultimately, at the end of the day, as security professionals and leaders, or either through holding management positions or in consultant positions and helping clients, ultimately, every security team doesn't have enough personnel. They don't have enough budget. They don't have enough resources, et cetera, et cetera. But when you focus, and I think we've all hit the nail on the head on this one, if we focus on helping increase awareness to all the employees, if we help increase and mold and change the behavior to not make security a checkbox item that can be very easily skipped, but integrate it, as much as I hate the cliche, into the DNA of the business. You make it part of life, you make it part of everything that they do, then what happens is indirectly you go from a security team of 4 or 5 individuals to 500 to 1,000 if you have all those individuals thinking stronger security-wise and working for you instead of beside or against you. And you integrate that. That's how you begin from the CEO on down. That's how that messaging works. And I think that's a very positive, very powerful, and a very effective message, is that security is not a department, it's a responsibility. It's not a siloed off section of offices. It's on every desk. It's in every mind. It's in every employee. So wrap up with that thought. So again, thank you to our panelists, Amanda, Chad, and Eden. Thank you to Peerless for allowing us to sit here and chat about security for an hour. Hopefully everyone listening to this finds this valuable. Out on the Peerless community site, you can reach out to us, any one of our panel members. This will be posted out there. I will share it onto my podcast and my blog, as I'm sure we'll spread this around on various social networks. Again, I'd like to thank you, and everyone have a nice day.
You too. Thanks, Drew.